Anita, welcome. How are you?
I am very well. Thanks for having me, Thunder.
How's your baby?
Big.
Big. You're a new mom. How was that experience? I can imagine it's something completely different.
There could be more sleep. It's pretty
How unexpected.
difficult. Right? It's actually better than expected in general. I think comparing with all other babies, he's doing very fine. He's a very happy baby.
All right. That's good. How much do you sleep?
6 hours,
Well, that's not too bad at all.
right? I thought it would be less. In the first week, it was 2 hours per 24 hours. That was
Sure. That's a whole new process getting into. But that's not what we're talking about today.
no.
Still, you have a very cute baby. You're welcome. We're talking about neurodivergence. That's one of the topics that I've seen a lot about in the last, let's say, year. But personally, I have no clue what that truly entails. So that's why I love having you here, because you're going to be educating me today as well. So tell me what the neurodivergence is all about.
Tell me, what do you think it is?
I have no clue. I mean, the divergence, I am assuming that is there's a scale of different aspects in anything neuroscience related, but other than that,
That's a good way to put it. So there are two words. One is neurodiversity, and one is neurodivergent. The first one is a noun. The second is an adjective. Doesn't make a lot of difference in English, but neurodiversity is a concept of human brains being wired in different ways. Like you have biological diversity in nature, you have different genders, you have different sexual preferences, and you have people whose brain are wired in a different way. That's what's neurodiversity. And neurodivergent is somebody whose brain is wired in a different way. So you use it saying, I have a neurodivergent colleague, or I'm neurodivergent myself, for example. I think in other languages, it's probably the same word, although in English there are two differences. How the brain is wired differently? That's probably what you're going to ask me. Doesn't matter for neurodiversity because there are around 15 to 20 different conditions, and they're all put under this big umbrella called neurodiversity. And I often compare it with Agile and Scrum. Agile is this huge umbrella where everything fits under, and neurodiversity is this huge umbrella as well. And under that umbrella, you have some very known conditions like ADHD, like dyslexia, autism, some less known conditions like dyspraxia, bipolar disorder, for example, but they all fit under neurodiversity. And a lot of people have more than one condition as well. So they all go under one big umbrella.
where do you fit in the umbrella?
Somewhere
there. Somewhere there.
Somewhere there.
How does it affect you?
I usually say it doesn't affect me, it affects other people.
Sure.
But actually, that's not true. I think I was just running away from admitting how it affects me. I'm not very good with crowds. Like, the fun thing is, I'm very good going to music concerts. Like, when I go to music concert and my favorite music style is metal, so it's very loud, I'm great. But walking on a busy shopping street is terrible. I cannot do it. So I don't go shopping a lot because it's a bit too much. Being in a restaurant with a lot of noises, I cannot handle as well because there are a lot of different stimulations, and I hear everything, and it's very hard to concentrate. So I'm not very good with crowds. I'm really, really bad with small talk. And there are some other things that I'm really bad at, but I'm really good at some other things. Like, my planning is above average. Think of people who plan very good. I'm above that. It has pros and it has cons, depending how you look at it. I also hardly ever forget things. So if I say something will happen, or if you told me that something, you will do something, or you shared some information, I will not forget it. And it also has pros and cons, depending how you look at it. And at work, I can be very detail oriented. And when you give me, let's say you give me a piece of text and there is a spelling mistake, I'm going to notice it immediately. And if there are different fonts used, I'm going to notice it, and I will not be able to read the book before or more specifically, I will not be able to read the Word document before I fix all the fonts being the same size, the same color, the same everything, because I'll be too distracted.
Okay. Coming back to the metal thing, that's something that stuck with me, because how does that put you at ease compared to, for instance, the crowds with shopping or restaurants? Like, what's the difference?
The explanation I have heard is because it's more expected. When you go to a concert, you know it's going to be loud, and I will not do that sound again. And you have prepared yourself, and you have chosen to go to that concert and be surrounded by something that you like. When you go shopping, most of the time, you're not there for the crowds. You're there for buying something specific, and the crowds are taking your attention away. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but it makes a lot of sense when you explain it that way.
Yeah, so the crowds in shopping are more like a consequential damage,
Yeah,
compared to, well, the crowd with a metal concert are like-minded people who are there for the band, enjoying the music, not necessarily getting in the way of your shopping.
I would imagine that's the reason, but I never analyze. I'm often, that's how it is for me, and I don't really care why.
Fair. I mean, if it works, it works. But it's interesting to see the difference, because if I think when I think about a metal concert, I don't think about it's not that like a very soothing environment would pop up.
For you, for me, it's
Yeah,
very relaxing. Like when I get stressed and unhappy, and I put Nightwish
sure.
or Rammstein or Metallica or something else, it's kind of like puts you at ease. But it's the same as people who listen to techno music and that puts them at ease, and I'm like, that's terrible.
Yeah, that would be me.
You see, it's just different preference.
Oh, sure, I get that, but compared to the restaurant kind of scenario, and especially shopping, I do hate shopping in that sense too. So I follow you. But it's interesting to see how that affects in different ways. Now, how does that affect you in team settings? How does it affect like different people? Because it's such a broad topic.
Because it's such a broad topic, it's also very hard to talk about it, to be honest, because I don't want to say everybody fits into it, because that's not true. Around 15 to 20% of world population are neurodivergent. Officially, although we think the numbers might be much higher because loads of people don't get their diagnosis or are not aware that they fall somewhere on the spectrum. But how it affects you, you get the diversity of the team, and you get people who sometimes have very different preferences, and they might, well, preference maybe is a bad word, because preference is something you can also change. But for neurodivergence, it's not saying they can change, it's just saying how they are. So, for example, people with ADHD have a tendency of being late very often. Not always, but that's one of the symptoms. And you could tell them they always need to be in time and just respect the team. That's not something they can always do. Like, if you are disabled and you are in a wheelchair, you cannot just be expected to stand up and start walking. Pretty much the same.
Daily stand up is really hard for those people.
It is, but then the question is, why are they always late, and how can we accommodate those people instead of saying, "Hey, Sander, just be on time next time, okay? Because it's very important." Is it really, or is there something else we could do? Could we have 5 minutes coffee in the beginning of daily stand up and then expect those people show up, or is there something else we could be doing?
Wouldn't that just push like the expected time that people would roll in?
It depends on the show you make it, I guess. I find it very hard because I'm a person who is hardly ever late. It stresses me out too much. So it's a good practice for me as a Scrum Master to try to imagine how it is for people who are always late. They don't want to be late. They always expect that they will be there on time. It's just their way of looking at time is not the same as our way of looking at time. And again, it's just something how you're born. So it's more in the team coming up with agreements what works. If you know there are some people who are constantly late. If there are people who are late simply because they don't think it's important, that's a different thing. But obviously, because neurodiversity is such a sensitive topic, you cannot just ask somebody, "Hey, Sander, by any chance, do you have ADHD because you're always late?" That doesn't work that way. So you also,
Why not?
like, why not? It's a good question. I would assume it's the same way as you wouldn't ask your colleagues, "Hey, what's your sexual preference?" But then you would say me, "Why not?" And I also wouldn't know an answer. It's just one of those things that your health is supposed to be something you choose, what you want to share and what not. And some people are more comfortable sharing it than others. But
Sure.
why? Society? I don't have a good answer.
But it's an interesting thing, right? It's very judgmental, not from you, but just in general, that people would have to feel uncomfortable talking about that just out of fear of how they're being judged, how they're being perceived, whether they're less worthy or not, because they're not. Just how we deal with that. Because the openness in whether that's neurodivergence or whatever is actually applicable, that's very interesting to put that to the table and make an open conversation about it.
I totally agree, and really appreciate that there are people in my workshops who feel very comfortable sharing it, but I have heard enough bad stories of people who have shared it and it has backfired on them. So I have heard of people who share it during job interviews. Amazing. That's great because you want to work for a company which accepts you the way you are. But in case if they don't hire you because of something you have shared, it's really hard to prove it. Probably you wouldn't want to work for them anyway if they discriminate against you, but you also don't want to start people suddenly treat you that you're less worthy. And we don't want to treat people that way, but that's me and you, I'm sure.
But that's also assuming that they're being discriminated against. It might be the case because it should be a relationship. It should be a match from both sides, right? So it could be the case that these people who are hiring can already identify, but this is not going to be a match in that sense that they're protective of the people that they're trying to hire or that's on the other side of the table.
It could be, and people who are neurodivergent, they bring a lot of strengths, which is
100%.
something we often don't think about. Like when you ask me how it affects me, the first things I mentioned were the things I'm less good at instead of mentioning something I'm very good at. So it's something which is still inside me as well. But actually, if you hire neurodivergence, they might be bringing things to your team which just level it up if you look at it the right way and if you leverage the potential.
Yeah, but that means that you need to have the environment to work with that. For instance, take a very high pressure, I don't know, law firm or whatever. Like think of the Suits kind of. I don't know if you've seen this.
I love it.
It's a great show, but I can totally imagine that people who are neurodivergent, what we're talking about, the types of people that we just talked about, would not necessarily thrive in that environment, depending on where you're at, of course, where your strengths are. So, depending on the things that you share, this may result in either a match or a dismatch in how people perceive that could go affect the person on the other side of the table.
Sure, definitely. And I'm sure there are neurodivergents who are really, really good striving in high pressure environments as well. And again, that's what makes it so hard because the diversity is so big that everything is possible. And how do you fit everybody in the umbrella?
Yeah, because from what I've seen, what I understand, there are people who are very nitty gritty into details and trying to figure everything out, I don't have. I'm like, let's just fucking go. Let's do it. I'll figure it out as we roll along, right? And that's something that I could learn from, where I could benefit from if we have the deadlines that actually work with such a setup, right? But I can totally see how that would augment a team in someone who dives into the details and the nitty gritty stuff to make a better team and make a better product.
I think it's the same with communication preferences. And if you think of these communication styles, no matter if you agree that they exist or not, but we say we need to have people with all four communication styles in the team. And I think that's the same with any other diversity. You need to have a bit of everything in the team. So have somebody who's very good with details, but not everybody. Have somebody who's very good with helicopter view, but not everybody, and so on and so on. If you have only people who are very nitty gritty, probably nothing will ever get done because nothing will be perfect enough for them.
Yeah. Now, I know that you're very passionate about this specific topic. Why?
There's so much happening in my head that I'm thinking, what of everything to start telling about? I think the most important thing is because I believe a lot of people in product teams are neurodivergent and we don't talk about it. And most of the times when it's talked, it's neurodivergents talking with each other about it. So there are a lot of information going on in autism communities. There are special newspapers for people with bipolar disorder, which share stories. For ADHD, you can go to different meetups. But where is the place for neurotypicals to learn more about it in a comfortable way and understands?
What's neurotypical?
Somebody whose brain functions typical way, like the majority basically, which is around 80% of people. Like heterosexuals, and so on and so on, to majority. So I want to bring that topic to neurotypical so they would learn about it and they would better understand their colleagues. Perhaps some people will notice, hey, there is somebody I recognize in my environment, in my team, maybe myself. I finally understand why those things are happening, and it will be brought to them in a way which is not very top down, or which is not very stigmatizing, but just having conversation like we're doing right now. I think those are the main reasons why I'm so passionate about it.
How did you find out about it?
How did I find out?
Yeah.
One of my very, very good friends got diagnosis several years ago, and I learned a lot through her. And the more she talked about things which she is experiencing, I was like, that sounds totally normal. But I don't understand what's wrong with it, and so on, so to say. So the more I was talking with her, the more I realized that just resembles myself too much. And I thought about all the promotions I have not gotten because I needed to improve my communication skills, which were never good enough. And then I thought I'll go and try to get diagnosed myself. And then everything else went pretty easy. And I was very lucky because there are also people who have had a lot of traumas through trying to get diagnosis. And in Netherlands, depending on which diagnosis you get, it can be free of charge, covered by your health insurance. In other countries like the UK and the US, it's super, super expensive, or you need to wait in queues for several years. So not everybody has the luxury with how we do it here to be able to get it. And I would say come to peace with yourself, but there are also people for whom it actually backfires because maybe you don't want to know.
Sure, I can totally see that too. How do you get diagnosed? Like, what's the process? How does that look like?
It depends per country, I think. And the funny thing is, in Netherlands, it even depends per city council because my friend lives in other side of the country, and her way was very different than mine. In any case, from what I understand, in this country, you go to your general practitioner. You say, I think I'm struggling with this and this, or I might have this and this. Can I be sent to a specialist for a talk? If you have a good general practitioner, they will say, fine, I'm going to send you. Then you go for a talk. And depending on diagnosis, there are different ways how to diagnose it. I don't know enough about each condition to talk about all the ways. For some of them, you need to do really some tests with your hands, or maybe looking somewhere, or writing, or reading if it's dyslexia, for example. For some others, it's just having a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on which city council you are, you have different tests or different waiting lines. So it can happen in a couple of months, it can happen half a year, 1 year waiting, and so on. And then you get the result. And if the result is you don't have it, they might say, but maybe you have something else. Do you want to go into that direction? Or they say, we think you might have it. Let's talk about, do you want some ways how to help you? And there are people who need help and there are people who don't need help. If you think about autism, we have all the stereotypes of people who are not able to work, who are not very able to communicate. They might need much more help in their daily lives. And they might need ways to figure out, what do I do with my life if I'm not able to work? But there are also people with autism who are CEOs, who are in well-paid jobs, high-functioning positions, who might be struggling in different ways, and the way how medical system will help them, if at all, is also different.
Sure, because the autism spectrum is fairly wide as well. So I can see how that would map and how some people might end up in, I don't mean to sound rude, but in more of a high performing job compared to people who are heavily affected by autism and have a lot of trouble.
And a few years ago, there were several diagnoses under what we call autism spectrum nowadays, and then it would be easier to, and I don't want to say where to put each person in a box, but
Sure.
Actually those were boxes. So you would have, if you say Asperger's syndrome, those were mostly people who were, I don't want to say higher functioning, because that's a word we don't like, but that's the easiest how to explain it. So people who might have a job, who might have a family, and so on. And you would also have a different diagnosis for people who maybe are not verbal, are more disruptive because they're not able to communicate so well, and who need a lot of help on a daily basis. And nowadays it's all put under autism spectrum because of various reasons. And there are people who disagree and people who agree with that. But thinking of other conditions, think of dyslexia, which we associate as a problem with reading and writing correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other symptoms of dyslexia as well. And I know a few people with dyslexia, and I have asked a couple of them, how does that affect you at work, for example? And the funniest thing is one of them said, it doesn't affect me at all. I'm hardly ever feeling it. And I think the reason why it is so is if you are working in an IT company and you are rather young, you probably grew up with computers most of your life. You had autocorrect most of your life. So writing was easier than 100 years ago, let's put it this way. Maybe if you're not so much into reading, but you're mostly watching videos, then that's also not a problem. And you never felt that it's affecting you negatively. More, there are only positive effects of being more creative, thinking out of the box, and finding solutions much easier because of the way how your brain functions. So for me, it was okay. It can also not affect you. Fine, that's very fine.
Yeah, that's good that teams or organizations are aware of that as well. Like, how does that affect this specific person? But I can equally imagine that, especially for very large organizations, if you have to think that through for pretty much every person, that's going to soak up a lot of time.
Definitely. And even in small organizations, it might be as hard because you might think small organization, we want to accommodate everybody. So we will try to follow everybody's preferences, and sometimes they can be going against each other. And in the big ones, maybe you have more diversity trainings where people are more aware. You have some more accommodations like noise canceling headphones and the silent room and whatever else, which small companies wouldn't be able to offer. But still, it doesn't mean it works for everybody.
True, very true. Now, coming back to your diagnosis, you were diagnosed. Were you surprised when you heard the results?
No.
Why not?
Because I went and seek the diagnosis myself, so I kind of expected it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it.
Were there any big changes or differences in what you assumed was going to roll out?
No, because I just said you either have it or you don't, and that's it. And I don't do anything else. The rest is up to yourself. But for me, why was it important? It was to come to peace with myself and like not blame myself. Hey, I should improve my communication skills and work better to get another promotion than another, or I should really get much better at small talk and being interested in what did you do in the weekend and whatever other stuff people do. And since I realized that that's just the way how I am and I'm not able to change it, it really you get your self-confidence kind of back. Like I really hate shaking people's hands, for example. So for most of my life, I have been doing it because that's socially acceptable. But if I ask you, why do we shake hands? Why is that happening?
I don't know.
Exactly. I don't know either. So I just stopped doing it. Obviously, Corona helped a lot because there was social distancing. And after Corona, it's much easier to say, hey, I'm not comfortable doing it. So now I'm very comfortable 90% of the time not doing. And the fun thing is, when I start saying, hey, I don't shake hands, but it's very nice meeting you, I have had a couple of people saying, oh, I actually don't like doing it either. Good that you're saying. So yeah. I'm kind of, so next time you don't do it.
I can see that, but this is just a big assumption as well. We were talking about your baby earlier, and right, usually after birth, you make like skin on skin contact. I assume that kind of trickles down in for instance, shaking hands because it's just building a connection.
That's what I heard. It's like the energy flows through your body and stuff. But then in Japan, it doesn't because nobody shakes hands in Japan, right? And I don't know.
I guess it's just our culture, at least over here.
I think so.
I don't know. never dove into that specifically. Now I've completely lost my own tangent where I wanted to go with this. But what changed after the diagnosis? So now you're aware of this, and I can see this is just a binary box. How did it affect your daily work? How did it affect your job, if any? Like, did it affect it in any regard after the diagnosis?
I don't think it did. If anything, it gave explanation to why things are happening a certain
Mhm.
way. But I don't think it really affected because I was very aware of things myself. I just didn't know that there's a word for it. Like you would think there is. I know I have or don't have certain things, but I would never think why. I'm just like, that's just how my brain works. Full stop. I don't need an explanation. Sometimes I would think, okay, that's a bit weird, but who cares? But again, if you are not somebody who's quite self-confident, I think diagnosis can help you to find other people who are the same as you, and then you come more to peace with yourself. And if you don't know enough about neurodiversity, you can get more information and education, which helps you to explain yourself.
You're what? No, you're okay. Are you okay?
I am okay.
You need water. Now I can also see people are listening and they're looking around themselves and see if they spot some people in their environment who might be neurodivergent as well. I have seen people who, in the name of neurodivergence, neurodivergency, diversity, thank you, lost the word, but they use it as an excuse to cover up the fact that they're just an asshole.
Yeah, Elon Musk, good example.
I don't know him personally, so really hard for me to judge from a distance. I think he's a genius on a personal level, probably not, but in the way that he does his innovation, I think it's very interesting to see. He pushes ethical boundaries. I can totally see why people think he's an asshole.
Do you have a question?
No,
Or you want me to react on that?
yeah, just riff on it.
I agree.
Okay, cool. How to deal with that then? How do I? Because if I want to be inclusive, either as a Scrum Master, as an organization, as a leader, I don't know, in whatever position I'm in, and I want to be inclusive. And now here, I'm pretty sure that this person is just an asshole, but pretends he's neurodivergent, neurodiverse. How do I deal with that?
I think the same way you would deal with any other asshole, you call it out and you try to understand why they're being that way. And I always say nobody wakes up today and decides I'll be an asshole today. People are assholes, there's something else happening. And obviously we as Scrum Masters, we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, but we are there to help the team. So you need to be curious and ask those 500 whys to understand why things are happening and brings that person the awareness that their behavior is impacting the team. So let's say you have a team member who is a bit too much blunt to the border of being very rude and saying you look terrible today or what a terrible whatever sweater you have. First example I could come up. I think it's important for no matter if they have any neurodivergent condition or not to say, why are you mentioning this? What do you want to achieve with it? And do you think how will the other person react and what will it do with them? And they can obviously say, I have this or that condition, but it's still the question, okay, but you still have some thoughts which you share and some thoughts which you don't share. So how do you choose which one to share and which one you don't share? So I think just treating everybody as a human being and taking it from there. It might sound too simple, but sometimes you just need to treat people simple.
I like simple. That fits my mind. Now, coming back to sharing their thoughts, take me along. You mentioned you're not into small talk. Take me along your thoughts, your brain. What happens to you when someone tries to engage in small talk? What happens?
Now you're expecting me to know what happens in my brain. Monday morning, we come to the office, meet by accident by a coffee corner, and you ask me, how are you? And the first question in my mind is, do you really want to know? Or am I supposed to answer, I'm fine, how are you? And then we never talk with each other again. So at first I tried to figure out which one of the two scenarios If we usually don't talk with each other, I'll reply, I'm fine, thanks, how are you? You reply, you're fine, and we never talk with each other again because that's socially acceptable way how to deal with it. If we are good friends or we work together in a team, I'm assuming you really mean it, and then you might get 10-minute long reply because I'm assuming you really mean it. But maybe you just wanted to start a conversation and actually ask me something work related. So I have those scenarios happening in my head to know why you're asking. And now, since I'm more aware of it, I usually also say, why do you want to know? And that sounds a bit rude, but if you explain why do you want to know, how am I, then I can know what to answer to you. And then we can have a discussion or conversation about what really matters. And you say, I'm really concerned because you don't look like yourself lately. What's happening? Or I had a great weekend and I want to know how was your weekend, because weekends are cool, or because you told me you'll be doing something. And then we can have a conversation about the weekend because I know you really need it. But if I don't know, or if I cannot figure out why you're asking, then it can bring very high stress level and anxiety level. So the easiest way how to avoid it is not to have a coffee, basically.
Yeah, that's really hard for a lot of people too, to not have a coffee.
You can go to the coffee corner when there's nobody, and sometimes if you see too many people there, you go to coffee corner one level above or beyond. I'm not exaggerating.
Isn't that super exhaustive?
It is! That's why remote work works for a lot of neurodivergent, because they avoid all those office politics, so to say, and all those expectations and not knowing and being afraid that they will come across as weird or something else.
So when COVID hit, I was working at a company over here in Eindhoven, and they had a lot of. I considered them just to be introverts. Let's stick to that because I've never dove into this topic. I was not aware this existed. And when COVID hit and we had to work from home, they were, sweet Jesus, let's work from home. And then they crawled back and they were completely fine. Is that the same for you?
I don't like working from home.
So you don't like working from home. You don't like the office crowd either.
I didn't say I don't like the office crowd. No. I think I would like working from home if I had a different job.
All right.
I think for a Scrum Master, it's hard to work from home, and I know there are people who will disagree. And maybe if you have a 100% remote company, it might work. I have been 100% remote Scrum Master for a remote company. It was very exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me. And why? Because I believe that when I'm in the office and the team is working, I can just look at them and I can figure out what's happening. I don't need to talk to them. I'm just there. I'm seeing who interacts with whom. I'm seeing how they talk with each other, how is the sphere overall, and then I can observe and come up with things I might need to help them, ask them, and so on. When we are remote and we only have a couple of moments together, and there is Slack where you don't see everything, it asks much more from you to go there and ask people and be in conversation and try to pull information. And sometimes you might make up problems which are not there because you don't have full context. And I feel that in the office, it's easier for you as Scrum Master. If you are, let's say, a copywriter, a designer, somebody else whose work is more individual and where you have less overlap with other people, I totally get it. And for developers, I think it really depends on the person, on what kind of developer you are, what kind of team you have, how much you collaborate, and so on. But again, that's me.
Do you overthink a lot?
Yeah.
How do you are you able to snap out of that? Because
yes,
because when I hear you, like, there's a lot going on, and like my therapist, I'm the exact opposite. My therapist always reflects on this. Like, I have a single car driving down a dirt road. You know, sometimes this thing goes by and it functions when it needs to function, and else nothing exists. Like, other than that, there's like a flat line continuously in my head, and only operates when it needs to. Now, when I hear you, it's the exact opposite.
It can get exhausting, but I think it helps a lot. I wouldn't say I overthink. I prepare myself for the various scenarios. Like today, before coming here, I was in Leiden, and there was a chance we will be arriving late in Leiden. and I had very little time. I needed to figure out where can I change baby's diapers and where can I feed the baby, because you could do it in the car, but it's not very comfortable. So while we were driving, I was like, okay, where can you do it? You can do it in the library. Okay, save the library location in the map. You could do it at the city council. Save the city council in the map. Check how many minutes walking it is from where I need to be. Figure out what is the order of things you would be doing. In the end, we arrived earlier than planned. I was able to do that in the location where we arrived, but I had this plan B and plan C. And why is it important? Imagine we would arrive late and would have no time to think, and I need to find a solution. I would just be not able to pretty much move, and I would get, I wouldn't say hysteric, but I wouldn't not be able to come up with solutions because I didn't have time to prepare. So thinking in advance and preparing those various scenarios puts me a lot at ease. But I know there are people for whom, again, it can be the opposite and who get paralyzed by stress, paralyzed by choice. So in restaurant, what I usually do, if I like too many things, I order the first one I saw and I thought I will like. That's a very good tip for people who can make up their minds. Do the first thing what you think of, and in a few weeks you will anyway, or days, you will forget what you did. So it's just a matter of being there in the moment, making a choice, and moving on.
Do you have any requirements in that regard from your environment, whether at home or your team? Because I'm in the middle. I don't have the stress of the paralysis by choice. I'll just go in and see what happens, and I'll figure it out. I don't care. I don't need the planning either. I don't dive stress. I'm in the middle.
You're very easygoing.
Yeah, but I can imagine that does not really correlate with your train of thought.
Mostly not. I can prepare myself for going with the flow, but then I need to know that this will be a day I go with the flow. So basically, it's not like there are people who say I cannot be spontaneous. I can be spontaneous if I know that that's the day I will be spontaneous. That sounds ridiculous. But if it's a day of like, let's do something without making plans, then that's fine. But if you just say, now we will kind of.
So you don't know what to do.
Yes. And it's like, I want to get the best out of it. So I need to research what's the best of it. Like, booking accommodation for holiday takes several days and weeks because you need to book something. But when I book it, it's really good.
Isn't that counter what you just mentioned? Like, just pick the first thing that you'll like, because in a couple days you'll forget anyway what you did.
That's for the restaurant, because it's I'm not a foodie. Sorry for everybody who thinks that food is very important. Food is there to survive. So it's an intake, so you can get energy in a few days. It doesn't matter if those were burgers, pizza, or whatever else. If you go on holiday and you stay somewhere for a week, I think that's important.
Sure, but in case we're gonna go to a restaurant and we don't know yet where we're gonna go, and let's say we have a team meeting or a team outing, or we do something with a team, and we just drag you along, and you have no clue where we're gonna end up. You're not prepared.
That's fine. If I don't need to make a choice and it's on you and you take, it's your responsibility to make sure it's good, that's also fine. But if you keep asking me, should we go left, right, straight forward? What's your opinion? I don't really know. Let's change the plan. Not everybody agreed. Like, think of you organize a team outing and there are 5 people in the team and you're trying to find a date for the team building. You know how hard it is? Yeah. And then you found a date when 4 people can make it, but 1 person cannot make it. I have had team members who really want to accommodate everybody, and that planning takes like 3 weeks because you cannot find a date for everybody else. That's super annoying. I would be just like, we go for majority, and those people who cannot make it, I'm sorry, next team outing.
What's the biggest challenge you've had so far dealing with, or others dealing with, neurodiversity?
There are a lot of challenges, interesting things. I think understanding how different each condition it is and what's similar at the same time. Like you mentioned, or I mentioned ADHD and autism, which can seem like polar opposites, but actually there are a lot of people who have both autism and ADHD at the same time. So they are not so different as we think, but at the same time, what really overlaps, and why is that really called neurodiversity versus isn't, as you said, some people say, aren't we all a bit of this and that? So really understanding what is this, each condition, that is still a challenge. And because I think at some point, maybe 100 years from now on, we will not have neurodiversity because everybody will have a bit of something. It's such a new concept that we're still learning about it.
I do think everyone will have a little bit.
Because there are a lot of people who are not diagnosed nowadays. There are a lot of people who are not aware that they're neurodivergent. And we don't really know 100% why people are born being neurodivergent. We do know that it's quite genetic. So if you have two people with autism and they have a child, it's not 100% guaranteed that the child will have autism, but it's very, very likely. If you have one person with autism, one person without, they get a child, there's also very high likelihood that person will have autism. It's not guaranteed. So the more we know about those conditions and more people get diagnosed, they make babies, more people get diagnosed, and so on. And a lot of people are underdiagnosed. It will just increase. Like, think of sexual preferences. 100, 200 years ago, we thought it's very, very little people who are not heterosexual. Nowadays, we have those all diversity, and they're just new names popping up, which I need to educate myself still on. So I think that also will be increasing for neurodiversity the same way that at some point, it's just not something people talk about because it's so accepted and so normal and so part of society. I hope so.
Does that differ per type of neurodiversity? Like dyslexia, does it have a different genetic?
I wouldn't know. That's a question for somebody who has been studying that for much more than I do.
All right. How do teams work with this? Like the teams that you've worked with, how do you bring that up front? How do you make sure that people understand? And then what?
I think it's first a question if people and if the teams want to work with it. I would hope they want. If they don't want, please be very careful and really think if it's the right time to bring it up. If it's a team which is not mature yet and who have loads of other issues and problems, maybe you need to wait for quite some time before that topic to be addressed. In my case, I have been working with teams where people are quite open and where they share their own conditions, and that's very fine. And then you can have a conversation within the team. Hey, you said you have this and that. How does that affect you? How can we as a team help and support you so you can do your best? And that totally changes the sphere because you as Scrum Master, you just facilitate the discussion. You are there to help them to open up, but you don't drive it. People drive it themselves. It can also be that you as Scrum Master notice things, but people don't talk about it themselves. And then I think it's more discussing with those team members, is this something you want to share with the team? And what's the best way how to share? Because I'm not there to share that that person or that person has a certain condition or some, because that's not my information.
Mm-hmm.
You could ask why not, but that's the same. Why don't we share our health information? Vicious circle.
I do.
That's great, but I think most of people don't. That's what I mean.
Would it be a good idea to have a fully neurodivergent, or would it end up in absolute chaos?
It would be a good idea, but fully neurodivergent team also includes neurotypical. But so, you mean people who are not neurotypical?
Not neurotypical.
I think it still could, as long as they not all have the same condition. Although now I'm stereotyping myself because why not? Maybe it depends on what kind of work they do. But people are very different. Like people, you put two people with ADHD next to each other, and they will have very different ways of working and looking at things.
It took a little while before we got to the "it depends" answer, but we're finally here. I don't think we've ever skipped an episode where we did not say "it depends," and Jim hates me for that.
That just proves we are Scrum Masters, I guess.
Now, how would you? Let's go back to a 10-year younger version of yourself, assuming that you were not diagnosed 10 years ago.
Not.
What would you say to your 10-year younger version
about neurodiversity or in general?
Yes.
I would say keep going and keep doing what you're doing. I was pretty on the right track 10 years ago.
Nothing changed in the meanwhile?
A lot of things changed, but no regrets.
No. Do you think in that sense it's a strength when people truly embrace it?
Yeah, I think so.
Why?
But I don't think that people truly embrace it a lot, unfortunately.
Why not?
Well, we're human beings. Human beings who are not confident about ourselves, who keep questioning things, who have some role models you want to look at, who maybe had bad childhood where parents told you you're never good enough.
Isn't that a cultural thing too? I think so.
Tell
I
me
mean,
more.
it sounds fairly absolute when you say it like that. When we're human beings and we're not confident, or that's kind of the stretch what I hear you say. I would like to think it's quite the opposite. I mean, if you have the environment where you're taught, where you're raised to be confident, to speak up about these kind of things, then you'll definitely grow up to be confident.
Sure. What's the percentage of people who grow up in such environment?
I don't know.
If you need to get
Never checked. These days,
minority,
I see way too many, or too much misery going on, and too few people are truly confident of themselves.
right? That's where I'm coming from.
But that's an environment that we can create.
So we should make sure that our children grow up being confident and being in an environment where we embrace them the way they are.
That's what I would assume, or that's how I would say that's the essence of myself as a father. To raise my kids that they're confident of themselves, that they accept themselves, they love themselves, that they have the right tools and skills to be self-sufficient, to self-sustaining, and that they are a good person in general. And they respect other people as well. That would be my job as a parent.
And it sounds great, and I hope you're doing it. But I think it's also a lot what the school is doing, what we as parents are not aware or cannot influence fully. Because from what I hear from a lot of people, families raising you great, and then you go to the school, and not all children are raised the same way. And then one child is influencing the other one in not the best way, and kind of like a fight against parents and other children who is winning, and you as a poor child is in the middle thinking, whom do I listen to?
Sure.
So again, a bit of vicious circle, but if all parents would be embracing it and raising all the children the right ways, then that fight wouldn't happen.
The right way, that's also in a very absolute statement,
Yes.
right? I think that we would benefit a lot also in the workplace to create an environment where people are confident. Just before we started recording this, I posted something on LinkedIn, a graphic of our book that's going to be released, some extra additional self commercializing of the book, released December 1st. But we were talking about micromanagement as well. And micromanagement tends to lead to a lot less confident developers. There's less creativity, there's less morale. It's just one big downward spiral. And if we create the environment as leaders where again these people can thrive and they're confident, they're allowed to do something that might not be in line with what was expected, but we have learned something so we can build up from that. You'll create a lot more strong teams, stronger people, more confident people, and that just creates a lot more value. And that's the same parallel with parenting in that sense. If we put people down, if we put our kids down, if we just blame them for their mistakes and not let them see, the world doesn't burn down unless you click like the nuclear launch codes. That's a different scenario. But otherwise, the world's not going to burn down. So why are we going to make a really big fuzz out of something that's not that impactful?
And how do you describe the difference between being confident and being arrogant?
Arrogance becomes an excuse to be a dick, and confidence is there's a nice parallel with, for instance, success and blame. Arrogant people tend to take the shine and give the blame, and confident people do it the other way around in many cases.
So how will you as a parent make sure that your children grow up being confident but not arrogant?
I try to let them reflect on their own behavior, that also that they're proud of themselves and they don't do it for me. The first thing that for instance, one of my daughters, she passed her swimming exam, her class exam in last weekend. She was super proud, and rightfully so. So the first thing I'll tell her, she can be really proud that she did her best, and she can be very very proud of herself. If I incentivize that, saying by you, I'm very proud of you, it becomes a more of an external motivation,
wow.
right? Like you do this because I'm proud of you, not because you can feel your own success.
So it's really very subtle word choice even.
I would say so.
And did you learn it yourself, or how did you come up with the ways how to do it, so to say?
I'm not even sure, actually. I don't remember.
Or just something of how you are?
Yes and no, because I would be up until my burnout. I think that's 8, 10 years ago now. I would be motivated by external forces mostly. I would also always go for the perceived best status kind of job. I would see these project managers in suits, and they had a lot of perceived status and big fat BMWs, high salary, and that's something that unconsciously I perceived or pursued. Then I had a burnout, and then this is sorry for the recurring listeners. This is something that we've been talking about quite a bit. But then I had to reconfigure where my energy comes from, like finding my why are my strength. And only with that introspection, I got to myself and started truly embracing myself and got into these kind of questions as well. Which is also where I saw like the educational system that we were just talking about is very high performance driven. It's always like better grades, better this,
Yeah.
better that, blah, blah, blah. And that's something that trickles down with me in my parenting as well. Like, I don't care if my son or my daughters get a 5 or a 6 or a 2 or a 10. If they've gotten a 10, awesome. Great job. Well done. If they've gotten 5 and they tried their best, still great job. I don't care about that 5. They have their whole lives in front of them to perform. If they're happy, if they do well in class socially, they help other kids, they try their best with their tests, I'm good.
That took me a lot of years to embrace that because I was always aiming for the highest marks in primary school and high school. And then when I went to university and then needed to submit my high school diploma, they didn't care if I got 4 or 10. I was so angry. I was like, why did I do this? Why did I study? So I don't want to say hard because it was really easy. But why did I get all those numbers if nobody's interested? They just want to know if I graduated or not. So I started getting 7s, and I was still ashamed of myself for getting 7. It's very low for me. But nowadays, indeed, who cares? I got my university diploma, and that's the only thing. And even that, actually, who cares if I got my university diploma or not?
In the beginning of your career, people will, but the more that you go beyond that, the less value that your diploma truly
in
gets.
this country. Luckily, we're not in the US.
Yeah, it still depends on what kind of companies that you work for, because I see a change there that's going on there too.
I think of all the jobs I have ever had, only one of them asked me to submit my university diploma, and that job was not related to what I was studying. I submitted my university diplomas, but I almost wanted to ask them why do they need it, because it's just like ticking the box.
What did you study?
Communication with specialization in journalism for my bachelor and tourism for my master.
Why the difference?
Because I grew up in a not very rich family, and back in Latvia, we didn't have the study how do you call it, the study credits which you have in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. So back in the days, you couldn't ask for money to study. So I needed to find something in master which was free of charge, and which was something I would enjoy. I think back then communications in a way how I wanted to study for master was not free of charge. So I went to look for other possibilities. And I love traveling and I like tourism. I grew up in tourism agency. So I went to that, and it was much better than my bachelor because it was a small class with 20 people or less. And in my bachelor, we were with 100.
Is that how you ended up in this country too?
Actually, yes. During my master's studies, I learned about a thing called Erasmus, which nowadays everybody knows, and I didn't know before then. And I was too late to do Erasmus studying, but I could do Erasmus internship because I was studying tourism in a way that you need to do internships, so not only academic. And I was sending my CV across Europe because it's cool to do it abroad. And one of the organizations in Amsterdam accepted me for 4 months, and then I never wanted to leave.
Nice. How did the neurodiversity affect your study? Because I can imagine that this is the way of conveying the message in university and elementary school, high school. It's pretty much the same thing. It's a teacher standing there kind of water hosing down the information, and good luck with that, how you deal with that. Which compared to the way that I teach is completely different, but I can see how that might not be the way that you learn best?
I never thought about it, but studying was very, very easy for me. And I really enjoyed it at primary school and high school because it was so easy. It was like I didn't need to put a lot of effort to get 9 and 10. So
Lucky
it,
you.
lucky me. But I also chose a high school which was not a very standard one. So we had a high school which was more like university style in terms of it was more working in groups, more having discussions with teacher. So it didn't feel very top down. We would be addressing teachers probably by first name. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember. But I know it was very cool high school, so to say. So that studying itself didn't affect me a lot. It was more figuring out how to communicate with your classmates. That was much harder. Somehow, when you're neurodivergent, it's easier to communicate with older people when you're a child because they're more grown up, I guess, and they treat you differently. If communicating with somebody your own age can get quite hard. So I didn't enjoy my classmates. And I know in high school, we had a very small class, and I can be quite blunt, especially back in the days, as I was not aware of social norms so much. So we had a history teacher who really liked talking about herself a lot. So you would hear a lot about her weekend, her car, and so on within the 14 minutes of lecture she's supposed to be giving. And I'm not a very patient person, and because I don't see very well, I always sit in the first row so I can read properly. So I was there listening, and after some minutes getting bored, and that was when mobile phones were not really common, so we didn't have them, but I had a book. So I'm there sitting on my next to my table, and you can probably see where it's going. And I had this super interesting book. So I would put it a bit under and start reading it while she would be talking about her weekend or whatever else. And then she notices it and she asks, "Is that book more interesting than what I'm saying?" And that's a moment where you're supposed to say, "No, I'm very sorry." And you probably know what I did.
Don't ask dumb questions.
Yeah, so I was asked to leave the class and never come back half a year before the final exam.
Nice.
Yeah, I managed to trick myself coming back by being overachiever and producing a 10-page paper on what I have learned about history based on that book. Not that she asked me to do, but I was like, I want to show you why it's more interesting. So that's some of the examples what I struggled in school.
It's interesting how you get punished for being honest.
Yeah, I should have seen it coming with my knowledge now, but back then I was like, that's a question, you ask me a question. A few years ago, I was at an event which was it was quite a sad event with a lot of sorrow in the place, and I was very observed with surviving. And then somebody asked me, "What do you want to drink?" And that's a moment when you should know what's socially acceptable in such events to drink. I kept thinking, what do I like to drink? I usually like to drink champagne, so I'm going to say champagne. Events which are quite sad, you don't drink champagne there, so it was not the right answer. Luckily, within a few seconds, I managed to excuse myself and ask for something else. I still cringe.
I can imagine. Because of not being able to order champagne, or because of the response that.
Because it's not socially acceptable answer for most of people.
It depends, I guess, how you would create the environment, but that's a whole different discussion.
Yes.
Let's not dive into that because we're already in for an hour. I want to be respectful of both your time and your baby's time.
And your time.
And my time. If there's one single tip that you would like people who are listening and they can recognize themselves in you, if there's one single tip that you would give them, what would it be?
Accepting yourself who you are is important. It's also a phrase said a lot of times, but I think it's not said enough. Like, I really believe that people are good in how they are, and everybody has some strengths which they might not leverage yet. So start using the strengths and find an environment where your strengths can really thrive and focus on them instead of things where you might be less good at.
I like that. It's basic, but it's super hard. It's almost like the last part in the previous Scrum guide. Scrum is easy to understand yet hard to implement, and that's pretty much the same for this tip. I think so. I'm not sure, so don't pin me down on it. I might be pulling this out of my ass, but I think so. But it's really easy to say, like, accept yourself who you are, and then it's really hard to actually put that into practice.
If you don't know who you are, you can accept yourself.
Thank you so much for being here. You educated me a lot on neurodiversity, and I'm definitely going to take that.
What's the one takeaway for you today?
There's not one single takeaway. There's many. I think being more cognizant of where people could be on that level in that sense, and be more. I don't necessarily want to say mindful, but engage in conversation a little bit more, because it's very easy for me to just trample over things and just keep going, because I'm very easy going and I don't really think things through from time to time. I just keep going, right? And I'll deal with the consequences as they go. But I should be more aware of this. Like, that's not how that works for a lot of other people. So that would be it.
Thank you, Sander.
Thank you. And thank you, Edward.
Thank you, Mel.
Dank u. Woo, woo. Feedback?